We like to think that some people just don't care, that they're cold, distant, unbothered, especially the ones who pull away when things start getting real. But here's what I want you to consider. What if the distance they create isn't a sign of indifference, but a symptom of something deeper? What if it's a defense mechanism so practiced, so embedded in their identity, that even they believe it's who they are? This is the illusion of emotional distance. And for the avoidant, it's not just a strategy, it's survival. Now, if you've ever been close to someone avoidant, you've probably felt like you were chasing a ghost. They're present, but not really. They share just enough to keep things functional, but never quite enough to feel secure. And when things start to get intimate, not necessarily physical, but emotionally close, that's when the retreat begins. They need space, time, a breather, and often they disappear altogether. But here's what's fascinating. Even when they walk away, even when they block, ghost, or bury themselves in work or other distractions, they often can't stop thinking about the person they've left behind. That's the part they don't tell you. It's the part they don't even like to admit to themselves. Because in their world, needing someone feels like weakness, and needing someone they've pushed away, that's unbearable. It is about control. It's about managing emotional input to avoid being overwhelmed or hurt. For many, this stems from early experiences. Perhaps growing up in environments where vulnerability wasn't safe, where independence was praised, and emotional needs were ignored or punished. So, they learn to downregulate attachment. They teach themselves not to want, not to need, not to hope. But no one escapes being human. You can suppress emotion. You can intellectualize desire. You can tell yourself 100 stories about how it's better to be alone, how connection is a trap, how the other person just wasn't right. But the body keeps score. The nervous system remembers. And sometimes when they're driving in the middle of a meeting, or just lying in bed at night, the thought of you hits them like a wave. And it keeps coming back again and again. Not because they want it to, but because their psyche is trying to metabolize something they've refused to digest. That's when the illusion of distance starts to break down. Thoughts are messengers. When someone can't stop thinking about you, even after pulling away, it's a signal, not always a romantic one. Sometimes it's guilt. Sometimes it's longing. Sometimes it's the unresolved tension of a connection that was too real, too fast, or too unfamiliar. But it always means something. And for the avoidant, it disrupts their carefully constructed reality, that they are fine on their own, that closeness is dangerous, that they don't need anyone. And here's where the psychological depth kicks in. That thought loop, the one they can't escape, is the unconscious mind knocking. It's trying to bring into awareness what the conscious mind keeps avoiding. That emotional distance isn't emotional freedom, it's emotional exile. And exile is lonely, even if you built the fortress yourself. But here's the kicker. Most avoidants won't tell you any of this. Not because they're malicious, but because they don't have the language. They haven't built the inner scaffolding to hold that kind of emotional weight. So they default to silence, to space, to distraction. And still, the thought lingers. You linger. And maybe you're thinking, so what? If they're thinking about me but not acting on it, what difference does it make? It matters because it reveals a fracture in the narrative, a moment of truth. A sign that even the most detached person has a core that wants connection, that the armor they wear isn't impenetrable. And when that illusion breaks, even for a second, it opens the door to change. Maybe not reconciliation, maybe not a grand return, but to self-awareness, to growth, to finally facing what's been avoided. Because here's the truth. Emotional distance doesn't eliminate emotional impact. It just delays it. The feelings don't go away. They just wait quietly, patiently for the right moment to surface. So if you're someone who's experienced this on either side, don't be fooled by the silence. Don't mistake space for absence. And don't assume thoughts don't mean anything just because they're not shared out loud. Because when the avoidant can't escape the thought of you, it's not just about you. It's about everything they've tried to run from finally catching up to them. And that's not weakness. That's the beginning of awakening. Emotional distance may feel like control, but when the mind won't let go, it's not distance. It's a sign the heart never really left. Do you ever have a thought that just won't go away? Not just a passing memory, not a fleeting image, but something persistent. A name, a moment, a person. You could be washing dishes, checking your email, laughing with friends, and suddenly they're there again. Not physically, but in your head, clear as day. That's not an accident. That's not random. That's what we call an intrusive thought. And for someone with avoidant tendencies, it's more than just a glitch in the brain. It's a signal, a warning light on the dashboard, and it's carrying a message they don't want to open. Avoidants pride themselves on control, mental control, emotional control, relational control. They have finely tuned systems for keeping their world safe from vulnerability. And they believe, often very convincingly, that if they don't think about someone, if they don't talk about them, if they remove the physical presence, the emotional weight will eventually disappear. But here's the psychological reality. The thoughts we suppress don't vanish. They just go underground. And they come back with more intensity when we're not looking. That's what makes intrusive thought so powerful. They're not logical. They're emotional. They're not asking for permission. They're breaking through the cracks in a mind that's been trying to keep certain feelings locked away. And the reason they're so persistent is because the content of the thought, the person they can't stop thinking about, represents something unresolved, something unfinished. Maybe it was love, maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the first time they felt truly seen, and that scared the hell out of them. Because you've got to understand something about the avoidant psyche. It doesn't want to need anyone. It doesn't want to feel dependent. But when a relationship or even just a moment with someone hits a nerve, when it pokes at an emotional depth they're not used to feeling, it doesn't just go away because they've ghosted or moved on. The nervous system remembers. The unconscious mind stores the data, and eventually the thought returns. But it's not just a thought, it's an echo of an emotional truth they didn't want to face, an echo of a connection that felt different, an echo of something unfinished, still vibrating beneath the surface of their carefully curated life. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. The more the avoidant tries to suppress these thoughts, the louder they get. That's because suppression, ironically, is a form of focus. When we resist a thought, we feed it attention. It becomes charged, it becomes sticky. And so instead of fading, it loops, it reappears. Not because they're weak, but because the brain doesn't delete things it perceives as significant. And make no mistake, the thought of you is significant. Otherwise, it wouldn't keep showing up in the spaces they've tried to keep you out of. But let's zoom out. Why does this matter? Why am I spending time talking about something as intangible as a thought? Because it breaks the myth. The myth that avoidance equals apathy, that silence means they're fine, that distance means you didn't matter. When someone can't stop thinking about you, even after they've walked away, that's not detachment. That's emotional residue. That's a story that hasn't been fully written. And whether or not it ever gets closure, the mind is trying to process it. Not to punish them, but to free them. You see, these intrusive thoughts aren't enemies, they're messengers. And for the avoidant, they're often the only honest voice in a mental landscape filled with denial and defensiveness. They're trying to get through, to say, hey, this mattered. You felt something here. Don't lie to yourself about it. And if they listened, if they actually leaned in instead of shutting down, they'd find something incredibly powerful. True. Not just about the other person, but about themselves. Because if the same person keeps showing up in your head, uninvited, it's not about them. It's about what they represent. Maybe it's the first time you wanted to open up and didn't. Maybe it's the last time you let someone in before slamming the door. Maybe it's the version of you that existed in that connection before fear took over. That's what the thought is trying to bring back. And here's the truth. You don't get free by running. You don't heal by ignoring. You heal by understanding. You grow by paying attention to what keeps showing up, especially when you didn't ask it to, especially when your whole defense system is designed to keep it out. So if you're that person stuck in someone's thoughts, even if they're avoidant, know this: your presence meant something real, and the mind doesn't waste time replaying what was irrelevant. And if you're the avoidant and you're tired of the loops, the replays, the unshakable thoughts, you've got to stop pushing them away and start listening to what they're trying to tell you. Because sometimes the thought that won't go away is the truth that refuses to be ignored. There's a dangerous assumption a lot of people make when dealing with someone who pulls away emotionally. You've probably heard it. Maybe you've even said it. If they cared, they'd show it. Or if they really wanted to be here, they wouldn't keep disappearing. It sounds logical, right? We're taught to measure love and interest through action. But when you're dealing with an avoidant personality, that logic starts to fall apart. Because for the avoidant, showing care and connection isn't just hard, it's threatening. Let me say that again. For avoidant individuals, emotional closeness isn't comforting. It's dangerous. And the closer they feel to someone, the more their internal alarm bells go off. So what do? They pull away. They go quiet. They become emotionally distant. And if you don't know how avoidance works, it's easy to misread this as indifference. But here's the truth. Avoidance is not the opposite of caring. It's often a deeply protective response that masks caring. And that makes it even more confusing. When someone who is avoidant starts to have real feelings, when they feel themselves growing more attached than they're comfortable with, their defense system kicks in. And for them, that defense system looks like withdrawal. It looks like coldness. They might even convince themselves that they're over it just to regain a sense of control. But here's what you need to understand. Underneath all that shutting down is often a very real emotional conflict. It's a paradox that lives inside them. I care, but caring feels unsafe. This isn't about playing games or being manipulative. This is about survival. Many avoidants come from environments early in life where vulnerability either wasn't safe, wasn't rewarded, or simply wasn't modeled. So they grew up learning to rely on themselves, to regulate emotion internally, and to avoid anything that might leave them feeling exposed. Love, for them, often gets confused with danger. Intimacy feels like walking into a room where all the exits disappear. And yet, the need for connection is still there. That's what makes it so painful. This is why the avoidant can think about someone constantly but still not reach out. It's why they can feel intense longing but simultaneously avoid any contact. Their nervous system is caught in a bind. The heart says yes, the fear says no. And so they live in this emotional limbo, caring deeply but staying distant. But here's the key takeaway. Their silence doesn't mean they didn't feel something. Their retreat doesn't erase the reality of what was shared. It just means their fear of vulnerability outweighed their capacity to face it. Now, this doesn't excuse hurtful behavior. It doesn't mean you should tolerate emotional unavailability. But it does mean that we need to stop reading avoidance as emotional vacancy. There is almost always more going on under the surface. Due disease, and if you've ever been on the receiving end of this, you know how maddening it is. You could feel the connection, you could see glimpses of their openness, those rare, beautiful moments when their guard dropped, and then suddenly they're gone, distant, flat, sometimes even cruel. And you're left questioning yourself. Did I imagine it? Did I do something wrong? You didn't imagine it. You triggered something in them that's been buried for a long time, maybe forever. And that's not about you. That's their work to do, but the emotional impact of you remains no matter how much they try to suppress it. That's why they can't escape the thought of you. That's why your memory lingers, not just in their mind, but in their nervous system. So when we say avoidance is not indifference, we're talking about the invisible war that plays out inside them, the part that wants closeness and the part that fears it. That conflict often results in silence, in distance, in detachment. But don't confuse that with apathy. It's not a lack of feeling, it's a fear of feeling too much. If you're the avoidant one, maybe this resonates a little too much. Maybe you've told yourself stories to justify the distance. I don't care, I'm fine, I didn't need them anyway. But if you're being honest, those stories don't quiet the thoughts. They don't stop the replays. That's because your defense mechanisms might protect you from being hurt, but they also block you from being fully alive. And eventually, that cost becomes too high. The good news? Self-awareness is the first crack in the armor. Once you stop pretending you don't care, you give yourself the chance to start healing, to start relating differently, to stop running from what matters. Because avoidance may silence your voice, but it doesn't silence your heart. And eventually, the truth of what you felt will rise, whether you're ready for it or not. Let's talk about control. Because at the core of avoidance, that's what it's really about. Not rejection, not abandonment, not even loneliness. It's about control. The avoidant person is constantly negotiating an internal battle between two opposing forces, the desire to connect and the need to stay safe. They want to feel close, but not too close. They want intimacy, but only if they can manage every variable, anticipate every outcome, and guarantee they won't get hurt. And since that level of certainty doesn't exist in real relationships, they default to control. That's the only way they know how to cope. Now, here's where things get really complicated. The more meaningful a relationship becomes, the more intense that inner conflict gets. Because when someone touches a deeper emotional nerve, when they get past the surface and start pulling out something real, it triggers the avoidant's worst fear, being vulnerable without being in charge. And the truth is, you can't be vulnerable and fully in control at the same time. Those two things are incompatible. Vulnerability demands surrender. It demands trust. And for the avoidant, trust feels like giving someone the tools to hurt them. So what do? They lean into control. They emotionally regulate by pulling away. They intellectualize their feelings. They might criticize you. They might minimize what they felt. They might even convince themselves they didn't really care. And they do all of this not because they didn't feel something, but because they felt too much, more than they were equipped to handle. Now, here's the kicker. When someone avoids closeness to stay in control, it doesn't actually eliminate their feelings. It just drives them underground. They suppress them, compartmentalize them, and convince themselves they're fine. And they are, for a while. But those emotions don't disappear. They morph. They come back as restlessness, irritability, overthinking, obsessive thoughts, and yes, the inability to stop thinking about you. Because no amount of logic can override the emotional imprint a real connection leaves behind, especially not when that connection exposes their defenses and touches the part of them that secretly longs to be known, without fear, without conditions, without needing to wear a mask. And that's the paradox. The avoidant wants to feel close, but on their terms. They want intimacy, but they also want to keep their independence, their emotional safety net, their sense of control. And those desires are in direct conflict. You can't simultaneously surrender and hold the reins. So what happens? They oscillate. They get close, then pull away. They open up, then shut down. It's push-pull, come here, go away. And it leaves both people exhausted and confused. But underneath all of that, there's longing, deep, unmet longing. The avoidant person may not show it in obvious ways. They may not reach out, may not say the things they feel, may not act like they care. But the thoughts, the flashbacks, the mental loops, they're signs of longing trying to break through the armor. And the more they resist those thoughts, the more power the thoughts have. That's how avoidance works. And this internal struggle between control and longing can last for years if it goes unexamined. Some people live their entire lives toggling between short bursts of connection and long periods of emotional distance, never understanding that the thing they're avoiding isn't other people, it's themselves. Their own fear, their own history, their own capacity to feel and not run from it. And if you're on the outside of this, loving someone who's avoidant, it can be devastating because you feel the connection and you see the conflict. You know it's not apathy, it's fear. And yet you can't force them to choose connection over control. That's a decision they have to make for themselves. And it usually only happens when the pain of isolation becomes louder than the fear of vulnerability. But if you are the avoidant one, you need to hear this. The control you're holding on to isn't saving you. It's starving you. You're not protecting yourself from pain. You're protecting yourself from life, from connection, from the full, messy, beautiful experience of being human. And at some point you have to choose. You can keep micromanaging your relationships from a safe emotional distance, or you can risk something. You can face the fear that's been running the show. You can let go just a little and find out that you're not as fragile as you think, that you don't need control to be okay. You need courage. Because the truth is, every time you silence longing with control, you bury your most authentic self a little deeper. And that version of you, the one who wants to love and be loved, is not the problem. It's the point. When you stop trying to control the outcome, you finally give yourself the chance to feel something real, and that's when everything changes. Let's get real about something. Avoidance is not just a behavioral pattern, it's an identity. It becomes a way of being in the world. For the avoidant person, the distance they create isn't just physical or emotional, it's existential. They don't just avoid people, they avoid themselves, their needs, their fears, their emotional truths. So when someone breaks through that emotional wall, when a relationship touches something deeper than they're used to, that experience doesn't just vanish. It becomes embedded. It becomes them, even if they try to walk away from it. Here's what no one tells you. Emotional avoidance is a short-term strategy that leaves a long-term imprint. And when the avoidant finally finds themselves haunted by the thought of someone, by a moment, a connection, a feeling they can't shake, it's not about the other person anymore. It's about the version of themselves they were in that moment, the version that let their guard down, the version that felt something true, the version that didn't need to be perfect or protected. They miss you, yes, but more than that, they miss who they were when they were with you. And that's a deeper ache than they know how to name. Because for the avoidant, most of life is lived at a distance, not just from people, but from experience. They move through relationships like they're watching from behind glass, observing, analyzing, managing, and every now and then someone comes along and smashes that glass, and for a fleeting moment, they feel alive. Exposed, yes. Scared, absolutely. But also real, connected, present. And then the fear kicks in, and they retreat. And then they spend months, sometimes years, trying to convince themselves it wasn't real, that it didn't matter, that they're fine. But no matter how much they distract or detach, something stays. A memory, a scent, a phrase, a look, a trace of what it felt like to be fully there. And that feeling keeps returning, not to torment them, but to wake them up. Because you cannot grow by numbing out the moments that scared you and shaped you. That's not healing, that's hiding. And eventually the avoidant starts to realize that avoidance doesn't erase pain. It just delays it. It makes it quieter, but more chronic. Like background noise they can't shut off. Like a thought they can't outrun. Now here's the deeper truth. The thought of you, the one they keep trying to suppress, isn't just about longing. It's about potential. It's the ghost of what could have been if they had shown up fully, if they had chosen openness over control. if they had believed in connection more than they feared it. And that gap, the space between what was and what might have been, becomes its own kind of grief. And grief, by the way, is a teacher. It shows up when we lose something meaningful, something that mattered, something we weren't ready to let go of, even if we were the ones who walked away. So what does that mean for the avoidant person stuck in this loop? It means the thought of you isn't just nostalgia. It's a mirror. It's reflecting the parts of themselves they've been avoiding. It's challenging them to look at the gap between who they are and who they want to be, between who they were in the relationship and who they were afraid to become. This is where transformation starts. Not in the comfortable moments, but in the moments that haunt us, the ones we can't forget, the ones that remind us of what we felt, what we can feel when we stop hiding. And if you're someone who's been left by an avoidant, don't underestimate the impact you had. You might not get the closure. You might never hear the full truth. But if they can't stop thinking about you, there's a reason. You represented something rare, something that got under their armor, something real enough that even now they're still carrying it, whether they know how to admit it or not. And if you're the avoidant one listening to this, maybe it's time to ask yourself a hard question. Are you avoiding them, or are you avoiding what they made you feel? Are you running from the connection, or from the part of you that finally wanted to connect? Because here's the thing. That version of you, the one that let love in, even just for a second, is not a weakness. It's your access point to freedom, to intimacy, to yourself. And maybe, just maybe, that thought you can't escape isn't a trap. Maybe it's an invitation. The past may be out of your hands, but who you choose to be now, in the presence of that memory, is entirely up to you.